The thing is, I did not think moving my husband backward was the same as removing him. 2 chairs, 1 camera, 1 family waiting for the perfect picture. I only wanted the photo to look balanced, and Matteo's face always carried too much tiredness into a room. Of course, I said it like a joke because jokes make cruelty easier to frame. By the time the final album arrived, he was the only person missing on purpose. My name is Elspeth Vale. I was 37, and I worked as a private heritage image consultant for wealthy families who wanted their lives to look older, softer, and better arranged than they were. The thing is, I believed in balance. 2 frames, 1 cream photo envelope, no crime in knowing where people looked best. That afternoon, I was standing inside Harrow and Finch, the framing studio near the old arcade, choosing between ivory matting and warm walnut for my parents' anniversary wall. The room smelled of cut paper and varnish. Behind the counter, a woman in black gloves laid out sample corners like small pieces of expensive furniture. I told her the family portrait needed to feel permanent but not stiff. She nodded because people in my work always nodded when you used words like legacy. Matteo came in carrying coffee and a folder of printed directions for the estate. My husband was 42, a civil protection engineer, and he loved through routes, weather checks, and backup plans. He had already marked parking, wheelchair access for my father, and the fastest way to get my mother from the guest suite to the garden without walking over wet grass. Once I found that suite. Every December, he printed 1 candid photo of us and wrote the date on the back. Not perfect photos. Real ones. Me with my hair half dry. Him squinting in winter light. A chipped mug between us. He said memory needed proof. I used to keep those prints in a blue box under my scarves. At the studio, he asked softly if something had changed between us. He said I had been correcting his shirt collars before family dinners, moving him out of photos and laughing too late at Pippa's jokes. His voice was careful, almost too careful. What he meant was that he missed standing beside me. What I heard was that he wanted me to feel guilty for having standards. I told him nothing had changed. Of course, I said the weekend was only making me tense. I said my mother had waited 40 years for 1 beautiful anniversary portrait, and I needed the composition to work. My phone lit up beside the cream envelope. Pippa had sent a message saying Matteo should avoid anything too accountant for the photos. I smiled before I answered. Matteo saw the smile. He looked at the envelope in my hand, then at the walnut frame sample, as if the back row had already been chosen for him. The estate smelled of wet grass, white roses, and old stone when we arrived on Friday evening. My mother had rented it for 3 days because she said a hotel would make the anniversary feel temporary. The house had tall windows, a gravel drive, and a garden wide enough for a family to pretend it had always been graceful. The thing is, my family liked things that looked settled. 2 stone lions by the steps. 1 fountain that did not work. No reason to admit we were all trying too hard. Matteo got out of the car before I had unbuckled my seatbelt. He took my mother's hanging bags from the boot, carried my father's medication cooler inside, and found the estate manager before anyone else knew where the keys were. My sister Beatrice arrived with her 2 children and a paper bag of pastries crushed on one side. Matteo took the bag, made the children laugh, and found napkins before the jam leaked onto the hallway table. That was how he moved through rooms. Useful first. Visible later, if anyone remembered. My mother, Imogen, kissed both my cheeks and said the garden light would be perfect if the clouds held. Then she looked at Matteo and told him she was grateful he had thought of the accessibility route. She said my father could not manage the slope near the fountain. Matteo said it was nothing. He said the west path was flatter. Everyone heard west path. I heard nothing. I heard him becoming the quiet hero of a weekend I had designed. Pippa arrived with a cream coat over her shoulders and sunglasses on her head, though the sky was grey. She hugged me first and whispered that the place finally looked like my family had money without needing to say so. I laughed because she knew how to praise the room I wanted to build. Then she saw Matteo carrying a box of candles through the hall. She said he was sweet, but the camera should not lead with him tomorrow. Her voice was low, but not low enough. Beatrice laughed once, more from habit than agreement. Then she looked toward Matteo and stopped. Matteo kept walking, the candle box pressed against his chest. His face did not change, but his shoulders went still in that small way he had when something landed and he decided not to drop it. Reese Calloway arrived before dinner to check the garden. He was the photographer, polished and calm, with a black leather camera bag and a voice that made instructions sound like compliments. He told me most families thought photos were about faces, but I understood that legacy was made before the shutter clicked. He said I had a rare eye for family composition. That word stayed with me. Composition. It sounded cleaner than control. During dinner, Matteo sat beside me at the long oak table. My father talked about retirement, my mother talked about the portrait wall, and Pippa kept asking Reese questions about lighting like she had hired him herself. Safia, Matteo's sister, arrived late after work. She hugged Matteo before greeting anyone else. Her eyes moved over him with the directness his family had, and mine avoided. After dessert, Matteo found me near the sideboard where I was rearranging place cards for breakfast. The room smelled of coffee and candle wax. He said Pippa had made the joke about his face and I had made it safe for everyone else to laugh. He asked what that was. Specific. Factual. One named incident. One real question. What he meant was that I had turned him into a surface for the room to step on. What I heard was that he wanted to make one careless line into a trial. My mother's voice lived inside that gap. She used to say that after my father left, everyone kept the prettier story because he controlled the photos. She said whoever looked composed looked innocent. So I told Matteo people were joking because weekends like this needed lightness. I told him he was too serious. I said Pippa had no power over him unless he handed it to her. He looked at the place cards in my hand. Then he said he was not worried about Pippa's power. He was worried about mine. That sentence had no place in the room I was building. I put Arthur's card beside Imogen's and said he was making things heavy again. Sophia stood near the doorway with a glass of water. She had heard enough to stop entering. She did not defend him. She did not accuse me. She simply turned and went back to the dining room. The thing is, silence from strangers is easy. Silence from someone who knows your husband before he became yours has a sharper angle. Later, my mother stood in the hall and told everyone that the anniversary portrait would hang above the fireplace forever. Pippa raised her glass to that. Beatrice smiled too carefully. Reese said the garden would be ready by 2. Matteo folded the printed schedule and put it into his jacket pocket. I watched the fold. 1 crease, 2 fingers. No drama. But the whole weekend seemed to tighten around that single photograph. By Saturday afternoon, the garden looked almost exactly how I had imagined it. The white chairs had been moved into 2 soft rows near the trimmed hedges. The floral arch stood behind the family like something from an old house magazine. The grass was damp at the edges and the air smelled of roses, cold soil, and the starch from my mother's linen dress. The thing is, a good family photo is never natural. It only looks natural after someone removes everything awkward. 2 chairs shifted left. 1 child moved forward. No crime in correcting a frame before it becomes permanent. Reese stood near the camera with his assistant holding a reflector. He asked me to check the first arrangement because he said I understood what my mother wanted better than anyone. That was what I liked about him. He made my control sound like care. Matteo was beside me at first. His navy jacket had a crease across one shoulder because he had helped move the chairs after the ground crew placed them too close to the hedge. His hair was neat, but his face looked tired. Not ugly, not bad, just tired in a way that did not match the cream dresses, polished shoes, and my mother's pearl earrings. Reese showed me the preview on the camera screen. My mother and father sat in the centre. Beatrice's children were in front. Pippa stood at a flattering angle near the left. Matteo's face was visible over my shoulder, serious and pale in the cloudy light. The balance felt wrong. I told Reese that Matteo should stand in the second row. I said it lightly, as if I were moving a vase. Matteo looked at me once, then stepped back. Pippa said that was better because the tall, serious ones always belonged in the back. A few people laughed. Beatrice smiled without showing her teeth. Sophia did not smile at all. Reese took another test shot. He turned the screen toward me. Matteo was still visible between my father and Beatrice. His eyes were not on the camera. They were on me. The thing is, I had spent my whole career saving families from bad angles. A face could pull the eye. A tired expression could make a celebration look like obligation. I told myself I was thinking like a professional, not like a wife. I said Matteo needed to move farther back because his face was ruining the balance of the family photo. The garden went quiet in pieces. First, Beatrice stopped moving her necklace. Then my father lowered his hand from the arm of the chair. Then Reese looked away from the screen. Pippa laughed once, sharp and thin, the kind of laugh that checks if other people will join it. Some did. Not enough to save the moment. Enough to make it worse. I added that I loved him, of course, but this was the legacy photo and everyone needed to look their best. My voice was bright. Too bright. Brightness is useful when a room begins to understand you before you are ready. Matteo stepped behind my father and the floral arch. Half of his body disappeared behind white roses. The reflector caught one side of his face and left the other dull. He did not argue. He did not ask me to repeat myself. He gave me exactly what I had asked for. A younger cousin near the front asked why Uncle Matteo was hiding. No one answered. Rowan had his phone lifted near his chest. He always filmed family things, toasts, candles, children running through halls. I saw the phone and still chose to believe he was collecting harmless memories. Reese told everyone to look at the camera. My mother adjusted her shoulders. Pippa lifted her chin. Beatrice touched her daughter's hair. Matteo stood behind the arch where I had put him. Then, just before the flash, he stepped out of the frame. It was not dramatic. No slammed chair. No raised voice. He simply moved sideways past the hedge, out of the family image. The flash went off anyway. For 1 second, the camera captured us smiling around the space he had left. I turned too late. Matteo was already walking toward the side path near the hedges. His hands were empty. That detail bothered me. He had spent the whole weekend carrying things. For once, he carried nothing. I followed him because everyone was looking. I said he was making a scene. My voice came out low and fast. He did not raise his voice. He said I had made the scene, and he had only stopped standing inside it. The quiet was the point. He knew it, and I hated that he knew it. I told him it was only a photo. I said he was punishing me in front of my family because his pride had been touched. He said it was never only the photo. He said it was the projector at my mother's birthday. It was the way I introduced him as useful. It was how I moved him to the side whenever the room started to matter. The hedge leaves moved behind him in the wind. I looked at the navy crease on his jacket and wanted to say he was being unfair. Instead, I told him he was proving why I could not relax around him anymore. I said every small choice became evidence in his hands. He looked at me for a long second. Then he said he would not return to the photo. I heard stubbornness. I heard control. I heard a man refusing to understand that some images only worked if everyone accepted their place. When I returned to the lawn, Reese was checking his camera without speaking. Beatrice had moved her children away from Pippa. My mother stood too straight beside the chairs. Pippa touched my arm and said it would be fine, but her eyes were on Sophia. Sophia was not looking at me. She was watching Rowan's phone, still low in his hand, as if the recording had become heavier than the camera. By Sunday night, the estate dining room smelled of cold coffee, extinguished candles, and the white roses my mother had refused to throw away. People had stopped talking about the photo directly. That made it worse. A subject avoided by a whole family does not disappear. It sits between plates and weights. The thing is, I had done enough events to know how a room recovers. You change the light. You move the flowers. You serve something sweet. 2 dessert forks. 1 closed door. No reason a single awkward joke had to become family history. Then Rowan's video started moving through the private group chat. It was not long, only a few seconds. My voice carried clearly across the garden. Matteo needed to move farther back because his face was ruining the balance. Then my bright little laugh. Then the question from the child. Then Matteo stepping out of the frame. People watched it in different rooms. That was the first thing I hated. I could not manage their faces if I could not see them. My mother said photos made everyone tense and that I had spoken badly, but under pressure. Beatrice did not answer her. She kept folding a napkin into smaller squares until it could not fold again. Sophia stood near the dining room door with her coat over her arm. She said Matteo had spent the whole weekend making the event work. She said he found the photographer after the first one cancelled, paid the extra fee for the accessible room, and asked that my mother not be told because he wanted her to enjoy the weekend. She said I repaid him by hiding him behind flowers. I told her she was making him sound like a martyr. I said nobody asked him to do all that. Sophia looked at me in a way that made my face feel poorly lit. She said that was exactly the point. Matteo drove home before me. When I arrived, the hallway was too neat. His shoes were not by the radiator. His keys were not in the blue bowl. The December photos were still on the wall, but the frames had been taken down and leaned against the skirting board. He was in the guest room folding shirts, not throwing them into a bag, folding them. That calmness did something to the air. He named the pattern without heat. He said it had been my mother's projector when I called him useful in front of everyone. It had been the client dinner where I joked he was better with extension cords than conversation. It had been the way I told people he was not a photo person, as if he had failed at being visible. I stood in the doorway with my coat still on. He said he used to think being useful was how he stayed close to me. That was his vulnerable moment. Plain. Almost embarrassing in how little protection it had. What he meant was that he had been loving me in the only language he trusted. What I heard was a bill being placed on the table. I heard him asking to be rewarded for every chair, every route, every quiet repair. So I told him usefulness was safe for him. I said he hid behind tasks because saying he felt unwanted would have made him vulnerable. The words were clean. Too clean. They landed because they were not false. He put one folded shirt into the drawer and closed it with both hands. That night, while he slept in the guest room, I opened the unedited preview gallery from Reese. The screen lit the kitchen blue. The first images were formal and dull. Then came the accidental frame. There we were. My mother and father in the centre. Pippa with her smile half ready. Beatrice looking sideways. Sophia looking at me, not the camera. And in the back, Matteo was stepping out of the frame. My father's hand was half raised toward him, as if some slower part of him had understood before the rest of us did. I kept the cursor over the image. The house hummed softly. The refrigerator clicked. The cream photo envelope from Harrow and Finch sat on the counter beside my laptop, still empty. For a few breaths, the picture did not look like Matteo ruining anything. It looked like a man leaving the exact place where his wife had put him. It looked like everyone else had seen it. It looked like I had been the last person in the garden to understand the composition. The door opened there. Not guilt. Something flatter. A line of light under a closed room. Then I moved the cursor away. I told myself Reese had caught an unfair angle. Cameras lie when people move between instructions. The frame was not honest. It was messy. I emailed Reese before I could sit with it longer. I asked whether the frame could be cleaned up so the family did not look confused. His reply came the next morning. It was professional, not warm. He said unedited proofs remained archived for accuracy, and any final album selections had to preserve the event record. Preserve the event record. He sounded like a man already protecting himself. At breakfast, I tried a smaller tactic. I made coffee for Matteo and placed it outside the guest room door. Controlled softness. A compromise with a handle. When he opened the door, he saw the mug, then me. I said I knew yesterday had been tense. I said I should have chosen my words better. I did not say I humiliated him. I did not say I wanted him hidden. I gave him the safest version of regret. He asked if I had told my family the same thing. I said I was not going to invite more drama into something we could fix privately. He nodded once. Not agreement. Storage. Later that afternoon, he removed the December photo prints from our hallway. He did not throw them away. He stacked the frames on the console and left the empty hooks in the wall. The hooks were small, silver, almost nothing. That was the first part of the house that looked abandoned. On Wednesday evening, the dining room smelled of printer ink because I had printed the album draft before Matteo came home. I wanted to see the pages on paper. Screens make everything feel negotiable. Paper gives a thing weight. The thing is, I was not trying to erase him. That is what I told myself while laying the pages across the table. I was trying to save the album from one bad moment, 2 stacks of proofs, 1 approval email. No crime in choosing the image that made the family look least damaged. Reese had selected the most usable formal shot. My parents were centered. The children looked forward. Beatrice's expression was tight but not obvious unless you knew her. Pippa looked bright. I looked composed. Matteo was not in the frame. Not hidden. Not awkward. Absent. The photo looked cleaner without the problem of where to put him. I hated that thought, then dressed it quickly in professional language. Negative space, balance, visual rest. I approved the album in the family thread before I could change my mind. Matteo came home 20 minutes later. His coat was damp from rain. He looked at the printed pages on the dining table, then at my laptop, where the approval message still sat open. He asked if I had approved the album without him in it. Specific words. No anger, no waste. I said it was the best photograph. I said everyone else looked good. I said forcing a worse image into the album would only keep the discomfort alive. He placed his keys on the table instead of in the blue bowl. That tiny change carried more weight than a slammed door would have. He said I had chosen the version of the family where he was missing because it looked easier for me. I told him he hid behind useful things because saying he felt unwanted would have made him vulnerable. There it was, the one thing he could not deny. I knew it when I said it. His mouth moved once, then stopped. He looked toward the hallway where the empty hooks still waited. He said that may be true. Then he said he had never made me small in public to prove he was hurting. That sentence had nowhere convenient to go. I tried moral height first. I said I was not responsible for carrying every feeling he refused to name. He said he had named this one. I tried identity next. I said women in my family had spent generations being told to soften the room for men who never said what they needed. He said he was not asking me to soften the room. He was asking me to stop using rooms against him. The rain tapped at the window. The printed album pages lifted slightly at the corners. He sat down across from me and gave the final offer in the same voice he used when he checked bridge reports. Clean. Exact. Almost kind. He said if I could tell the family plainly that I humiliated him and approved the album because I preferred him absent, then we could begin from truth. I heard a trap. I heard him asking me to stand in front of my mother, Pippa, Beatrice, Safia, everyone, and hand them a script where I was the cruel wife and he was the wounded man who had waited patiently for justice. I said I would not perform guilt so he could feel taller in front of my family. The sentence stayed between us. Matteo leaned back. Not far. Just enough to leave the table without leaving the chair. He said he would handle things properly now. No legal language, no threat. That was why the sentence touched the back of my neck. Properly from Matteo meant dates, copies, folders, receipts, quiet witnesses, every object placed where it belonged. I reached for my phone because that is what I did when a room stopped obeying me. I texted Pippa that I was not insane for wanting one good photo, was I? I watched the message sit unread, then read, then unanswered. Hours later, she sent only a grey thumbs up. It was nothing on the screen. It was a whole person leaving the room. Reese called while Matteo was upstairs. I answered too quickly. I expected sympathy, or at least professional warmth. Instead, he asked which print package I wanted and whether there were any disputes over image rights before production. His voice had changed. He was managing exposure, not admiring me. I said there was no dispute. He paused long enough for me to hear that he did not believe me. Then he said his studio kept all original files and timestamps under standard policy. Standard policy. Another clean phrase. Another person stepping back without saying goodbye. Later, Matteo came downstairs carrying the small blue box where we used to keep the December prints. He opened it on the dining table. Inside were old photos. Us in winter coats. Us near a cheap hotel mirror. Us laughing badly in a train station. The last one was from December the year before. I was holding the chipped mug. He had written the date on the back in black pen. He removed the prints from the box and set them aside. Then he took off his wedding ring. I watched the movement because watching was easier than speaking. One ring, 2 fingers. No raised voice. He placed the ring into the cream photo envelope from Harrow and Finch. The same envelope I had brought home before the estate. The one meant for beautiful prints. He sealed it, pressed the flap flat, and wrote my name on the front. I told him he was being theatrical. He looked at the envelope, not at me. He said nothing. That silence was not empty anymore. It had order. It had a schedule. It had already left the room before his body did. The private viewing room at Reese Calloway's studio had beige curtains, a low oak table, and a smell of fresh photo paper mixed with cold coffee. I arrived expecting to review the final anniversary album with my mother and Beatrice. The cream photo envelope sat on the table when I entered, bent at one corner, my name still written across the front in Matteo's careful hand. Matteo was already there with Safia. He was not beside my family. He stood near the wall with a folder under one arm. The thing is, I still thought the meeting could be managed. 2 sample albums, 1 neutral room. No reason the right language could not make the picture smaller. A woman in a dark coat came in after Reese. She asked for me by full name. I signed because everyone was watching, and refusing a clipboard makes a person look guilty before they know the charge. She handed me a thick envelope. Inside were a petition for dissolution of marriage, a motion for temporary exclusive use of the marital residence, and a temporary financial restraining order covering the joint accounts until the first hearing. The hearing was listed for 6 weeks later on the family court temporary orders calendar. I pressed my thumb into the cream envelope until the corner bent deeper. The petition named the video from Rowan's phone, the unedited proofs, my email asking Reese to clean up the frame, and the approved album without Matteo. No strange evidence, no surprise. Only the things I had made in rooms full of people. I said this was about one bad joke during a stressful family weekend. Beatrice, who had not spoken since I arrived, said the photo was only the first time everyone saw what Matteo had been living inside. Reese looked at his tablet. He said all original proofs and timestamps were preserved under studio policy, and he could not alter or suppress disputed material. His voice was flat, useful, safe for him. Matteo said he was not staying to review a family album that taught him he was optional. Then he left first. Safia followed him without looking back. Reese sent one final email later through his studio manager and removed my family album from his promotional queue. I moved into a furnished apartment near my office because Matteo received temporary exclusive use of the house he had owned before our marriage. The joint accounts became something I checked through formal notices instead of morning banking. Beatrice stopped inviting me to family planning chats. Safia blocked me, and my mother kept the anniversary album closed in a drawer. Reese never spoke to me directly again after his studio manager sent the delivery invoice. A client cancelled a heritage wall consultation after someone forwarded the private story that had never stayed private. I had believed control protected the family image. The thing is, Control only works while people agree to stay where you place them. I thought removing one tired face would make the photo beautiful. It made every other face look like a witness. The cream photo envelope stayed on my desk, bent where my thumb had pressed too hard. I wanted him out of the frame, and then I hated the empty space he left.